In psychology, learning is a long-term behavior that is based on experience. This is split up into two main types of learning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In this video, our main focus is on classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is associative learning in which the stimulus, or experience, occurs before the behavior, and then gets associated, or paired, with said behavior. It was accidentally discovered in 1927 by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, who was a Russian physiologist with an interest in the digestive system.
Because of his scientific achievements, Pavlov was awarded the 1904 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. In his study, he surgically added tubes inside dogs' cheeks to collect saliva produced, in response to different types of foods, which he then collected and measured. This led Pavlov to notice that the dog would begin to salivate not only when they were eating, but also when they had sight of the empty bowl or heard the footsteps of the laboratory's assistant. This had intrigued Pavlov, so he designed a controlled experiment to figure out which stimuli would make the dog salivate. Because of this experiment, Pavlov was able to understand that organisms have two types of responses to their environment. One is unconditioned or unlearned responses or reflexes. The second is conditioned or learned responses. In Pavlov's experiment, the unconditioned stimulus was the food, because it was the stimulus that produced a reflexive response in the dogs. The unconditioned response was the dog's saliva, because it was an unlearned reaction to the dog food. The neutral stimulus is presented right before the unconditioned stimulus, which in the case of Pavlov's experiment was the food. The neutral stimulus itself was the ringing of the bell. The neutral stimulus does not initially produce a response before the experiment, but after pairing the ringing bell with the food repeatedly, it became the conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is the stimulus that produces a response after being paired with the unconditioned stimulus repeatedly. The conditioned response is the behavior caused by the conditioned stimulus. The behavior in this experiment was the dog's saliva. The conditioned response and the unconditioned response are typically the same in all situations.
In classical conditioning, extinction is known as the diminishing of a previously learned conditioned response. The phenomenon known as spontaneous recovery occurs with the sudden reappearance of a previously extinguished conditioned response after a long rest period. Stimulus generalization is a tendency for stimuli similar to the conditioned stimuli to elicit a similar response. Discrimination is known as the learned ability to distinguish between a conditioned stimulus and other stimuli that are not paired with an unconditioned stimulus. In order to demonstrate classical conditioning, we are going to be using these pairs. In this scenario, Alex and Jen are in a relationship, and it's the Canucks playoff season.
Alex is an avid fan of the Canucks and is very passionate about winning. Alex and Jen both watch the playoff games together, and while watching, Alex enjoys drinking beer.
When the Canucks lose, Alex tends to overdrink and become aggressive. After a few losses, Jen becomes accustomed to associating the Canucks logo, which is on the jersey Alex wears, to aggression, which in turn causes her to respond with fear.
Eventually, Jen becomes too fearful to maintain a relationship with Alex. And Alex goes on to be a part of the Vancouver Canucks riot, while Jen finds herself a new teddy named Ted.
Next season, Ted takes Jen to a Canucks game. At the Canucks game, she finds herself feeling inappropriately fearful around the various Canucks logos. In this scenario, the unconditional stimulus is Alex's anger, which in turn causes the unconditional response, and that was Jen's fear. The neutral stimulus was the Canucks logo, which was shown on Alex's jersey. After multiple associations of Alex's anger with the logo, the conditioned stimulus becomes the Canucks logo, and the conditional response is fear. If this had happened with the fear of any hockey logo, it would be known as stimulus generalization, but since it wasn't and only happens with the Canucks logo, it is known as discrimination. After a few weeks, Jen begins to stop associating the Canucks logo with fear, and this is known as extinction. But when her fear reemerges after a couple years of a rest period, this is called spontaneous recovery. We found this cute little comic which displays classical conditioning in a real-life setting. In it, the boy is in class and is used to having the lights turned off in order to take notes. His usual reaction to this stimulus is a groan. When this boy meets a girl and they hit it off, his initial reaction to her turning the lights off is still a groan. She obviously did not like that very much. In this example, the unconditioned stimulus was the note-taking, and the neutral stimulus was the light being turned off. His unconditioned response to the note-taking was groaning. Therefore, after much association of note-taking and the lights being turned off, the lights being turned off became the conditioned stimulus, and the groan the conditioned response. In today's world, classical conditioning is effectively used in the elimination of fear and anxiety, or in aiding in the quitting of smoking or alcohol.